Welcome to the Level Up Artist Podcast. We're your hosts, Adriana May and
Jackie Sanders. We're two art professionals sharing forward the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journeys.
We talk to artists, leaders, and art professionals that demystify the creative process and discover new ways to succeed as a career-minded artist.
If you find value in these conversations, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you'll be notified when we drop new episodes every Tuesday. On today's episode, we're going to talk about art workshops because workshops can be a great way for artists to learn something new, get out of your own head, and really just switch up your creative routine. I know Adriana and I have both had great experiences with workshops, but there are so many different things to choose from.
Yeah, and to make a quick distinction too, we're not necessarily discussing say college level courses that take a whole semester. Yeah. These are more, they could be 6 weeks at your local art community center, or it could be online, which we'll talk about those a lot too. It could be for a weekend, or it could be at your local arts council. There's all different types. Some of them are at the artist studios themselves. So there's all kinds of types of workshops out there. But obviously, sometimes it can be a little overwhelming, especially if you're signed on to different newsletters by different artists or different artist institutions or learning centers, where you're going to get sometimes bombarded with all these different shop offerings, class offerings, I should say. So this one will say, I have a 6-week course on color, and I have this other course and this other thing. And you're just like, which one do we even pick? So those are the kind of things that we're going to be talking about today, and trying to narrow down some of those offerings and trying to pick what to go for first.
Exactly. Because I think the first thing that you really have to think about are the fact that there's so many different types of workshops for especially career-minded artists and hobbyist artists. So figuring out what type of workshop do you want to do. To start, there's different creative medium specific workshops. So everything from digital art and illustration, fine art painting, drawing, sculpture, 3D art. These are all specific to the outcome of what you're going to be able to develop your skills in doing. Printmaking workshop, that's huge because it also may include different technology or tools that are not readily accessible or are a larger investment, which we'll kind of dive into later, of a factor that's worth considering with workshops. Things like photography and digital media workshops. So maybe you have some experience with the medium like photography, but you want to level up those skills. Those are different types of workshops that you can, I'm going to take a 1-day course. A 24-hour course would be very long. A 1-day course specifically on photography is a great way to hone those skills in.
Yeah. And you've probably heard us before in other episodes talk about being a beginner again, and having that be a great way to break out of a creative block, or to try other mediums to help evolve your existing ones. So I love those medium specific ones. But I feel like a lot of times the quote unquote better bang for buck can be the more subject matter specific ones, or the more focused ones that are not necessarily tied to different medium. Simply because if you're doing one that's a portfolio development workshop, for example, which is one type, it doesn't matter if you're watercolor, if you're oil painter, if you're acrylics, if you are, a sculptor, whatever. A lot of the things that they're going to discuss for portfolio development have more to do with whatever medium you're already working with. So I really like those. Unless, again, I'm trying to be a beginner again in something else, in which case, obviously, the medium-specific ones are great. There's also art therapy and healing art type of workshops. Some of them are led by therapists. Others are therapy by other artists. I love those too, because a lot of times it's in a group setting, and it's a safe space to discuss, different things you're going through, and finding out that other people have similar experiences, and you're all making art while you're in the middle of that. So those are very nice. And then there's other types like public art and community engagement workshops. Those, I think of them as being more informative or educational in a different way than the other ones. Basically, they are empowering you to learn about the processes behind public art installations and talking about communities, how to do designs, how to find funding for these larger projects. So they almost have like a networking element to them, a little bit different than the others. And they're essentially like explaining a preset process that you don't have control over versus some of the other ones we just talked about. Like you still have the freedom to kind of do whatever you want within parameters, but these are more like, here's how this preset thing by this government institution works, and we'll help you navigate it, but it's not like you can do whatever you want. You do have to follow the instructions, and they're just helping you demystify that. So those are pretty cool too.
Yeah, and with that structure, there's also different workshops or even like meetup groups on a regular basis that can be super helpful with that, in terms of they have art critique workshops, which that's actually how Adriana and I met, was at a art critique group. So it may be just an evening workshop where you sign up online. It may be an ongoing monthly thing, and every other month thing if there's a group you could find. But art critiques are a great way to really have a deeper understanding of your work, because like Adriana mentioned, it's different than the subject matter specific or a medium specific group sometimes, where it may be all different artists from all different mediums or only painters, to where they can really give you constructive feedback on your work, especially if they don't know you and your work. It's great to get a super objective, okay, what are your first impressions? And the thing I'm trying to communicate through my work, is that successful? Or if it's not, what are people getting from my work? So you really can get that deeper understanding of maybe the role your work plays in art history. There may be old masters that you didn't even know about that someone can refer you to, and really contextualize maybe some problems that you're having with your art, or what is super successful. So it informs your creative practice in a better way. That's the great thing about art critiques, is that maybe if you're trying to find a new lens to which to look at your work, it can be a great way to do that. And the same thing with professional development classes. This is kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, to where art critiques are strictly focused on the work itself, where professional development is typically where artists can learn marketing, branding, more of that business side of the art world, on how they can promote their work effectively and build a successful career as a career-minded artist. But workshops that focus on those things specifically, that ultimately help your creative process, because you learn how to get in front of more people, but it's not about the art itself. It's about all that other business stuff, like we talk about on this podcast.
Absolutely. And of course, within each of these different categories we're talking about, there's quite the wide range of offerings available. So to help you narrow it down and not add all these different workshops to your, let's call it your hypothetical cart. So you'll want to figure out what type of workshop you want to take, but possibly more importantly, you want to figure out what your goal is with the workshop first, and that will start helping you narrow down some of these choices. So by setting these clear objectives, you can make sure that the workshop that you pick is a successful and worthwhile investment for you, not only in terms of money, but also in terms of time and potential for it to help evolve your artwork, right, in your art career. So some of the goals, to kind of give you some ideas, are skill improvement, which I feel is like probably the most obvious one. Like if you take introduction to alla prima oil portraits, right, and it's something that you're starting to get familiar with portraits, and it's a little bit more specific to how do I get from A to B with this course, right? It could be about a specific medium or technique. Another one, you might be taking a workshop for inspiration, especially if you're feeling a little bit stuck and you're trying to get fresh ideas and infuse them into your work. Other type of workshops you may do because you're looking for networking opportunities, right? And I feel like a lot of those professional development ones that we talked about definitely can lead to this, where you meet with other artists and instructors to help expand your professional network. Portfolio enhancement, so they can help you kind of clean it up a little bit, see what you have there, what's cohesive, what's not, and kind of like help you kind of point you in the right direction with your artwork. And then, of course, feedback. I love those because you can actually seek help, or seek advice from other professionals on specific areas of improvement in your work.
Yeah, and I think it really is different for everyone, as you mentioned, Adriana. You may be wanting to take a workshop just to build your own confidence. So boosting your confidence and your creative abilities, maybe even taking a class that you work or taking a class specific about a medium that you work in. And maybe you're not going from level 0, but trying to take your level 7 to a level 8, just really fine tuning those skills and building confidence with it. Also, another goal could be things like time management. If it was a more business focused class, how do you juggle all of these different elements of being a career minded artist and having the admin and the business and the art making time? Time management's a huge skill that is very important for that. Even something as simple as just general creative exploration, kind of similar in finding inspiration, but also just letting loose and having no expectations of, okay, by the end of this class, I'm going to have 3 paintings that are like ready for my portfolio. It may just be, I just want to play with a new material and I have no expectations on having like a quote unquote completed piece by the end of it. Just play and get messy and explore. It can be really, really refreshing, especially if you're in a creative rut. Also, things like problem solving, learning how to overcome artistic challenges and problem solve creatively, either in your current practice or just sharpen those skills with the new medium. And professional development. So acquiring, as we talked about earlier, those skills and knowledge of strategies on how to pursue a career in the arts, maybe in public art specifically, maybe on it's more, okay, critiquing resumes and your CVs, so more of those admin professional development type skills that are very important this day and age as a career-minded artist.
Absolutely. And of course, there may be a temptation to try to do all of it. But number one, we do not have unlimited time, and most people don't have unlimited money either. So we definitely have to consider, that they are a financial investment. And again, also an investment of your time and of your energy.
Exactly. And I mean, workshops can be a great alternative though, because they often are less expensive than a formal college education, but they are still an investment, right? You can span it out also to when you have the financial means or the time, but it is an investment. So we also want to talk about how you can make sure that you pick the right workshops correctly. We've talked about a lot of different factors, different types of workshops, but also making sure that you're getting the most out of your investment. So we're going to talk about that after the break. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by the Level Up Artists Business Community. This ever-evolving membership values community over competition and growing connections with fellow creatives who share the same goals and challenges as you.
Life as a modern artist can be both exciting and overwhelming. Art school or self-taught, emerging or seasoned professional, there's a lot of information out there, but what do working artists actually need?
Other industries have continuing education programs for their professionals to sharpen up their skills and stay up to date with the systems, technology, and tools needed to succeed. And we believe that artists should too.
We've spent countless hours of trial and error weeding through tons of information to find the gold and creating sustainable systems that actually work so you don't have to waste your time going down endless rabbit holes.
We are passionate about exchanging ideas and sharing resources with fellow career-minded artists about the business side of art. From artist documents and exhibition prep to templates and tools to help you work faster and smarter, our course modules cover everything from social media to technology and sustainable studio practices too.
Ready to get started? Head on over to levelupartisthub.com to learn more, get immediate access, and level up your creative career today.
Welcome back, everyone. So in order to make sure that you pick the right workshop for you, there are a handful of different factors that you do want to consider. And that really starts with, of course, as we've talked about earlier, the workshop content. So ensure that the workshop covers a specific medium, a specific technique, or subject that you want to learn and improve upon based on everything that we talked about before the break. So that would be the first thing, is really looking at the workshop content and saying, is this something that I want to be working on?
Yep. Instructor qualifications. And we're not saying that your instructor has to have a PhD or even a college degree in something specific to what they're teaching you. But if that's not the case, then you definitely want to see what their experience is like. Do you actually like their artwork? That's another one. I've seen some workshops taught, and then I look at the instructor's work and I'm like, like if there's no alignment, maybe there's still something else they can give me value on, but I'm not going to take a class on a specific skill if I don't like how they do that skill. So definitely research your instructors a little bit.
Yeah, and that could also become a potential networking opportunity too,
Mhm.
depending on where you are in your creative career. It may be a relationship that you want to build with that instructor or with fellow artists who also admire that instructor. You may already
Mhm.
have that commonality. Another thing to think about is the duration of the workshop. So determine if it's a right fit for your schedule. It could be a one-day event, it could be a weekend workshop, it could be an ongoing weekly Tuesday night workshop for 6 weeks. But of course, also from the duration standpoint, if you are already busy Tuesday nights with another standing commitment, that won't be the best workshop for you because you won't be able to make it for the entire workshop or any of them. So something to think about.
Yep. The location, is this online? Is this in person? Do you have to travel there? I mean, it kind of goes into some of the duration and other considerations Jackie mentioned, but like, where's this at?
Yeah, that's definitely one of those logistics that you have to think about, as well
Mhm.
as the cost of the workshop itself, which is
Mhm.
also typically a very big barrier of entry for some artists. I think those are the most two obvious factors of what is the workshop on and how much does it cost. So thinking, okay, what is the fee for the workshop? Can you afford it? Do they offer payment plan options? And making sure that it fits into your budget, because although it is a financial investment, I would strongly encourage artists not to do a workshop if it would truly be like an unwise financial decision.
Mhm.
Very rarely is a workshop like make or break in your creative career if the finances are that tight, which there are moments and seasons of life where that can be the case. So definitely don't feel like you have to do a workshop and then it'll greener pastures on the other side once you take this 48-hour class. That's rarely the case, but it can be a great financial investment if you're able to do so.
Yeah, and if you think it's that great of an opportunity, but the finances really are going to be a strain, reach out. Sometimes instructors will have different alternatives available. Like some colleges allow you to be an auditor or to observe. You just don't get a grade, but either you pay a reduced cost or sometimes you can be there for free. So
Yeah.
definitely ask. Even some online programs I've seen will have different kinds of fellowships for artists of color or from different economic backgrounds.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll do it for free. Sometimes it's a discount. Sometimes you can do a trade of work. They'll say like manage, do this task in exchange for access. And some of them will just let you have it for free. So if you are at that, if you're going through that kind of situation, don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah.
Worst they'll say
Can't
is
hurt.
no. You move on and do a different one. So definitely something to think about. Also related to costs is the materials themselves. So is this a workshop that includes art supplies, especially if it's in person, if it's virtual? Do you have to pay an additional cost to have something shipped to you, like some kind of kit? um Depending where you live, do you have access to the materials needed? If this is an online ceramics workshop, for example, where are you going to fire your stuff? Like, is there a ceramic studio
Yeah.
near you, and what are they going to charge you to fire there, as opposed to if you do this workshop in person and your instructor is taking care of that? So
Yeah.
definitely something to think about is the material side of things.
Yeah, and that's another thing in terms of if it is an in-person workshop, then of course, if they're providing the material, it may be a larger upfront cost for the workshop, but it is balanced out because it's like almost that all-inclusive package where it includes the material. So it makes sense that it is charged more upfront. Plus, there may be access to specific tools that, like to your point, either a kiln, or if you're doing a printing press workshop, that's a huge piece of equipment that is not normally available to the public. So there is added cost with that, but you get this like exclusive experience and sometimes often training on how to use these tools that you really can't get anywhere else. So that's something to consider too, is the exclusivity of the materials that you'd be able to have access to through the workshop. Another thing is really thinking about the size of the class, both virtual and online, is understand that the class group size, it can really gauge how specific the content may be and how intimate of an experience it'll be for you, especially for in-person. Virtual is a little different because it doesn't necessarily matter if there's like 4 people on a Zoom call or like 50, unless they have an open Q&A section, in which can get a little wild sometimes. But if you're in an in-person class, a 5-person workshop is very different experience than a 20-person workshop in terms of the instructor being able to answer your questions, in terms of conversation to have with other artists. Maybe you want more people in the class because you just want to get to know other artists as a huge motivator. So understanding class size and where you will feel comfortable is also a huge factor to consider.
Super important, your skill level. And this is one that's like, you have to be really honest with yourself in terms of like, where do you see yourself? If you're going to try to take an intermediate pottery class, wheel throwing class, for example, and you're more of a beginner, you may struggle a little bit more if you don't have the basics down that a beginner might. So it depends what you're taking. You definitely want to be, you know, as close as you can to the advertised skill level of the class. If you're not sure, definitely don't be shy about reaching out. That instructor would rather hear from you and see, like, help you gauge what the best fit is, especially if it's one of those classes where they do come in quote unquote different levels. Depending on the institution, some of them will have prerequisites, and the system that you're logging in through won't let you go to intermediate till you finish beginner, but sometimes it doesn't have that. So when that comes up, if you have questions, reach out to the institution or the instructor, and they can help you figure out which class is the best fit for you, because you definitely don't want to be in a class that's so advanced that you're lost half the time and everybody's going too fast because you're still grasping some other elements. And vice versa, you don't want to be that advanced painter, for example, and you've just paid a boatload of money to be in this advanced class, but it was geared at beginners, and now you're just like way ahead and waiting for everybody to catch up. Like, you definitely want to be somewhere in the middle when it comes to that. So don't be afraid to ask if in doubt.
Yeah, especially in those scenarios, then you quasi become a second teacher in the workshop, which can be fun sometimes, but not if you're also—
That's not what you're paying.
Right, exactly. So another great thing to look at too are the reviews and testimonials about the workshop, especially if it's a workshop that the artist or institution has offered before. Oftentimes they'll share testimonials, whether video or written. You can also reach out to previous participants. Maybe the artist shared a post on Instagram, a group picture, and then they tag different artists that were in the class. You can reach out to them on Instagram, say, hey, I saw this picture on so-and-so's Instagram of the class that you took. What did you think of it? This is where I am. I'm thinking about doing it too. And so they may also be helpful in gauging those types of things of skill level. This is what they liked. This is what they wish they had done differently, to really get a sense of their experience. Because that way you just go into the class more informed of managing your own expectations of what you're going to get.
I will add a little extra bit to that one, is definitely ask if they get some kind of commission out of it, though, because there are classes that I've taken, and I did ask artists that were recommending it on their Instagrams and whatnot, and then found out they were getting a kickback. It doesn't necessarily mean that their feedback on it isn't genuine, but it's almost like when you see a review of a free product received on Amazon, for example, you're going to take it with a little bit of a bigger grain of salt of like, okay, maybe they're having this positive expression because if I use their link, they get something.
Yeah.
So
that's typically for online classes, right?
Yeah, it's typically
like, okay, well, for every person you refer to the workshop, you get 5% of the class fee or whatever. So like it's more incentive to give a good review. That makes sense, especially if there's like there's typically for like the super big, either national
programs,
or international style programs. So great thing to think about, but typically for the community center pottery class, that's not normally the system they have in place.
Yeah. And they don't do discounts either. So those are fine. I wish they did, but that's a different story. The other thing you want to think about is kind of the workshop format. So do you prefer a more hands-on or interactive workshop, or you're more open to a lecture style? So I've definitely been to art classes where it's mainly slides, like a presentation, and there's just a little bit of the practice. And then I've been on the opposite, which is my favorite. I'd rather it be hands-on like 95% of the time with some demos. But it depends too what you're learning. Obviously, if it's kind of like we talked about, if it's like professional development and it's about how to write your artist's bio, you're not getting your hands dirty on anything per se. There's going to be a lot more of the presentation side of things. So definitely something worth looking into before you sign up.
Very true. And another thing to think about too is what their cancellation and refund policy is. Because of course we all go in with the best intentions whenever we make a purchase, but life happens sometimes, whether it ends up conflicting with a family commitment that you forgot to put on the calendar. Maybe you get sick, maybe for whatever other reason, it's just not the right timing, or you just can't make it to the workshop. It's great to know ahead of time what that cancellation and refund policy is, whether it's no refund and sorry, you're out of luck. Maybe they'll let you transfer it to another artist. So you could at least do like a trade that way. Or maybe they'll say, hey, you can have a credit to a future class, or a full-on refund. These are all things to think about, and like what options would be best for you, because whether you get sick or there's just a family commitment or any type of conflict, it's always good to know kind of your options that you have going into it.
That's so true. And I definitely like some of the online ones have like a 30-day money back guarantee, which definitely makes me feel a little bit better. That if I go in there and I'm like this is very beginner level, but they were advertising it as advanced, and I'm somewhere in the intermediate, then I'm like, okay, I have a choice to at least get some of it back.
Right. Because you realize that like your pre-assessment of the experience was off, like based on the conversation we're having of, okay, you thought it was advanced, but it's this level, or the opposite of like, I need to go do more workshops before I'm even ready for this yet. So it's great. Some people will also do like, even like a 1 day, like first day free from a 7-day online workshop. So you can like kind of come in, get the vibe of the instructor, see what the content's going to be like, kind of like a peek behind the curtain, so to speak. Can be super awesome.
Yeah, some of the online ones have like trailers, or they'll have a free lesson that you can watch, which again ties into that cancellation refund policy. It'll help with your expectations of what to offer. If you do like watch the sample lesson and you're like, this doesn't tie in, or I don't like the way they presented the voice, anything, it can be anything, then you don't even have to sign up. So it's great. Good job. You saved yourself a lot of money and time.
Right. Or the opposite, you like watch that and you fall in love with the instructor, and you're like, okay, I'm like consuming all this information right now, because this is like the perfect level for me, and I just like can't get enough of it. And then it is that great experience that you're hoping for.
Yes, hopefully. And then another thing to consider is going to be, are there any networking opportunities available through this class workshop? So do they let you connect with fellow artists or professionals in your field? A lot of the online ones will have a Facebook group or Mighty Networks or some other type of place where you can contact others, or they'll have like live calls on Zoom and things like that. And then of course in person, they may have that too. But there's also going to be classes that are structured where you come in, your instructor, professor, teacher, whatever is doing their thing, and then you break off and everybody's gone. So you're going to want to have some expectations around this. And again, like Jackie mentioned earlier, don't be afraid to reach out to a previous participant and ask them to get a rough idea of how this part of it works.
Yeah. Another thing to think about too is that those resources beyond the workshop itself. So many workshops, whether virtual or online, may give you access to additional resources, such as like the course material, video recordings of the course. Maybe, especially if it's an in-person workshop, there are different like printed PDFs that they give you. It may be, oh, if you take this class at a community center, then you get access to the kiln for X amount of time, or a discounted membership to use it. So access to additional resources can be a super huge value add. Is something you want to consider, that, okay, will you have time to really dive into those resources when you're done?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Another one's going to be portfolio development. So can it help with your portfolio? Can it help with the evolution of your work and, trying to get all your stuff cohesive? Or is this something that's very off the path that you're on? And if it is, then just make sure you make that as a conscious, decision, as opposed to like, oh, shiny object syndrome. Like, will this actually help you in some way? Will it help you with that portfolio you're trying to build out?
Yeah, exactly. And also just looking at those personal goals that you're having, as we talked about earlier, reflecting on what are your specific goals and objectives for attending this workshop, developing a specific technique, developing a new style, just feeling inspired and breaking out of a creative rut is a great way to take a or is a great reason to take a workshop. So figuring out what those personal goals of yours are, and then ultimately deciding before you pull the trigger on purchasing a workshop, saying, will this be that right fit for what I need right now?
Absolutely. A final note I'd like to add as we start wrapping this up is, as a self-professed, I don't know if that's the word we're going with it, online workshop fanatic. Let's go with that. I will have to say, like, a lot of these things we discussed today, I wish I had had a checklist of them, honestly. It would have been helpful in the past, because I've bought a lot of workshops that then I took and I was like, this is absolutely underwhelming, or I don't have time for the amount of time commitment that like it comes with it. I will say though, like 95% of the time I come out like smiling and this was fantastic and this was great and it added something to what I wanted to do. So don't let it deter you. Obviously, like what we're trying to do with this is kind of like have you go in with your eyes wide open as you make the selection and let it be something that you're excited about. The last bit that I'll share about this, which you kind of touched upon, is like some of these will have lifetime access. Some of them have 30 days. I'm talking about online, of course. Some of them have 1 year access to them, which if they do, my biggest tip with these is you need to schedule the time. Schedule that time based on what you have available, especially if they're online, especially if they say they're lifetime. Schedule the time, give yourself a goal, and then follow through with it. Maybe it's every Monday from 3 to 4 p.m. You sit down and you work through this thing until it's over. Adding that bit of routine and discipline to your practice is also going to be really helpful, because your brain, after a few weeks, you're going to be ready. You're going to be like, oh yeah, it's time to sit down in my virtual classroom and work through these lessons and to see how I incorporate them into my practice. Like, what do I take? Which of the tools in this toolbox that I'm learning from am I going to take into my practice, and which ones are just going to stay there for the future? So I think that would be the last bit in there, is like, you definitely have to schedule this out.
Yeah, especially I think creating that routine can be so important for virtual workshops, especially if you're someone who maybe thrives off of that in-person energy. But it maybe is a more admin focused workshop, or writing your resume, writing your CV. I mean, that's a great way that you could also instill almost like a routine with other friends of yours, whether you're a partner, whether another artist, or even just another friend who maybe works remote, and say, hey, how about every Monday afternoon we work at a coffee shop together? So that way you're both working on your own computer work at the same time, but it becomes that almost the element of commitment that an in-person workshop would have. So I think that is super important and super good advice to make sure you really do get your money's worth for those online classes as well. So by carefully considering all of these factors though, and setting your clear goals, visual artists can really, really maximize the benefit of workshops, because I know Adriana and I have both loved the workshops that we've taken. Definitely have a few on our radar of ones we want to take in the future. And it can be a super valuable investment for artists on their creative journey, no matter what phase of life you're in.
Absolutely. Well, we hope you enjoyed today's conversation, and that's a wrap.
As always, both of our blogs will be linked in the show notes, where you can find episode notes and links to all of our other podcast episodes.
If you want to stay connected with us in between episodes, share your feedback, or have a question you would like for us to answer on the podcast, you can reach us through social media. I'm at Amate Art across all platforms.
And I'm at J Sanders Studio on all platforms. And if you want to follow the podcast, we are at Level Up Artists on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.